Hi everyone, welcome. This is Darren Eastman, Product Manager, also Release Post Manager for 14.0. And with me is our Release Post Manager for 13.12, the person who should go without any introduction, Mark Wood. Mark is here with us today to share some best practices related to the use of Git and branching to simplify the managing of the release post content. So we want to share this video with everyone and then potentially iterate on with these learnings and update the handbook page as needed to potentially make this a bit smoother process going forward. So Mark, you want to share with us what you did so successfully during the last release post?
Absolutely. I'll jump right in here. So the release post is currently set up in such a way that you do a lot of it through our web interface, through the web IDE, and you make your changes that way. And that works really well until you end up with a merge request with, let's say, 140 files on it, and you're trying to find the right file to make the right suggestion, to make the right change, and it becomes very difficult. And we've actually gotten feedback from not only release post managers in the past, but some of our technical writers and things, that it's very difficult to figure out when you're looking at the preview app of the release post and you see a typo, how do you find what file that typo was in? And there's a few ways that do this. It's really actually quite simple on the command line. So I guess I just wanted to kind of walk Darren through this as he's taking on this for 14.0, and we'll kind of work from there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I don't know how well this is going to work. I have a quite large monitor, so sometimes the screen sharing makes everything a little small to read. So if this isn't working out, we'll go a different way. I also have in the retrospective an opportunity to sort of make some improvements here to the release post process. We're going to kind of work through this with Darren and the 14.0 release timeline and see if this is worth putting into the release post instructions. Basically what I've done is I opened a command window here, and this is my local copy of the www.gitlab.com project. So I'm on the master branch right now. When you do the release post, you run a series of scripts, and this is detailed very well in the release post handbook. And what it basically does is it creates a whole new branch for you for your release post version. So for me, it created a 1312 GitLab branch. Now that branch has since been deleted because it was merged. So I can't bring up that exact thing. What I can do is I can bring up the merge request that was used for that, and I can show you some of the difficulties we've had as we go forward. Let me try to find the actual branch. That was, I've apparently closed a lot of things recently. This is one thing about the release post, is you will close a lot of merge requests, which is great.
Gotcha, makes sense. Yeah, and Mark, you probably are on a very large monitor because even though I have a large monitor myself, your browser window is pretty tiny, but I can still see it. So I think you'll be fine.
Okay, excellent. So I'll look for that in a second, but effectively what I did is when it creates this new branch, you end up with a branch of the project locally on your PC, and then you end up pushing that branch remote, which means putting it onto the GitLab server in this project. You actually end up with a remote branch. Now, what you can do when you do that push is you can tell your local branch to set your upstream to the version that is now on the GitLab server, which is exactly what you want to do. So what I'll do here is, let me just do a test here. We're going to update to the latest version of the www project by doing a simple pull. And actually, let me see if I can zoom in on this.
And so Mark, for those folks that don't typically use the command line, you've basically opened up obviously a terminal window and
Yes.
using the command line to interface with Git versus relying on the GitLab UI.
Correct. So if we go to the www.gitlab project and we go to the main project, there's instructions here for how to clone this project. If you click this little drop down, it will show you, clone with SSH, and you can actually copy this to the clipboard. And if you go ahead and paste that into your command line window, you can then see I could do a git clone of that project, and I would end up with a copy locally on my machine. And that copy is one for one what is currently in the master branch of gitlab.com for the www.gitlab project. I also believe, Darren, just for your reference, I think they're changing the name of master to main, which is fantastic. I think that's happening somewhere before you probably pull your branch. So you'll probably end up against main instead of master. So where you see master in mind, it will soon be main to be more inclusive, which is great.
Gotcha. Hey, so just to clarify, you said pull the branch. And so in your process, in terms of what you did for 13.12, you logged in, you opened up your command line, and you pulled the main branch from GitLab into your local repo. Okay.
So this updated my local copy of the main branch, which is named master here, to what is currently the main branch in the repository stored online. And the reason I'm doing that is just to have less changes, less delta, as I now fork a branch off of this. So I want it to be as up to date as possible. So I can actually go ahead and say get checkout, and I'm going to create a new branch with the -b, and I'm going to go ahead and say I want to check out a release test branch. And what this does is it actually makes a copy of the main branch that I just had and gives it a new name called release test branch. And this now is my working copy. So I can go ahead and make changes in here. So here is all the files, the same things you see online, and I can actually go to data release post, and I can see all of our released post things. There's the unreleased directory that we all put our files in as we go through this. If I go to 1312, which is it's already been completed, so it's in the 1312 folder. There are files in here. And let's say if I come over here and just go to and find our released here, and let's say we were to find a typo. This is one of the examples why it's quicker to work on the command line. We scroll down and we say, hey, I want to make an edit to this useful GitLab CI/CD information in the pipeline editor. There's a problem here. I want to make a change. Since all of my files are right in one folder, I can use all of the command line tools, and people can Google these. I mean, I think there's some good tutorials for, basic command line things. But one of the joys for this is I can actually say, okay, the first few lines or the first few words in this with capitalization and everything is creating your first GitLab CI.
Hey, Mark, can I interrupt? Before you jump into the command line, can you, for folks that aren't that familiar with the command line, can you show them how they would solve that problem in the GUI? How do we try to solve it in the GUI?
So yeah, to find, this is a great question. To find this in the GUI, okay, this is my post. The way the release post is structured, you can see actually in my GUI window, all of these files are merged together when the web page is built, and I end up with this nice web page. However, this is in its own file, but you don't really know what file it's in. So if I wanted to find that, I would have to go over here and go to my data folder, and I think it's called release posts 1312. So I can navigate to this same folder. So what you're seeing in this window is the same files you're seeing here. But now I look at it and go, okay, useful GitLab CI/CD information in the pipeline editor is the name of the feature. I would need to find that by browsing these files. And while we do have naming conventions, it doesn't really mean that that's going to be the easiest to find. Like, so I could look through this and I don't really see off the top of my head this file. So if I wanted to make a change, I'm sitting here clicking on things that might be correct, which is a little bit painful.
You're burning cycles, you're burning minutes of time trying to find this file in order to make that simple text change.
Right. So let's see, useful GitLab CI/CD information, pipeline editor. I mean, you kind of have some key things. Pipeline status, I mean, is that it? Like, so you can click on it and then it loads, you go, oh no, that's not right. So then I have to go back, and you can see where this is a bit cumbersome. There's a command on the command line. There's numerous commands. I'm not going to go over the entire command line here, but there's a command called grep, which is basically searching for something. So I can just say grep, and I can say I want to search for everything. And there we go, pipeline drawer.yaml. That's the file. Now,
finally,
right, that's not obvious from this title. And you can either then come back over here and click on it if you wanted to and make your changes in the web IDE, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. Or you can do something as simple as saying, pick whatever editor you want, open it up, and you've got this file locally. Now, this also opens you up to be able to use whatever editor you prefer. So if people don't want to use the web IDE, though it's very good, they may choose to work locally. I can come in here and let me just change something just so that we have a change. I'll save that and I'll exit back out. So I made a change to a file. that's only local. That has not been pushed yet. And again, to push it to your remote branch, you would have to then actually use commands in the command line. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky for some people. So if I actually do a git status, git is fantastic, and it actually has a status command, it will say, hey, you know, you've modified this folder or this file. If I want to add this file, I can do a git add, and I can actually type out the name of the file. And what it's telling me is this file on my branch is different than what's on the main branch that I pulled. It's also unstaged, and you'll see that it says unstaged. What does that mean? That means that I haven't actually committed this file yet. I could still revert with no harm, no foul, no changes, nothing. I can get back out. So I could at any point type this git restore command, and it would go back to what it was. So again, if I made a mistake, no problem. You can fix it very easily. I do want to choose to commit this. So I'm actually going to go ahead and create a demo release post change, and we'll just cancel the merge request. So I'm going to go ahead and do git commit, and that's going to commit all of my stage changes. I prefer to type the message on the command line. If you just type git commit without the -m, it'll prompt you to edit the commit message. I'm going to do it right here, and I'm going to say, I'm introducing a typo for demonstration purposes, and now I have a git commit. And if I look at that and I do a git status, what it's going to tell me is I'm on this branch that I've created, and there's nothing to commit. In other words, all the changes I made are in the commit somewhere, but they're not actually online yet. Darren couldn't get to them, and nobody else could get to them. They're still local. So if I want to actually put that online, what I would do is I would do a git push. And normally you'd say I want to push to the origin, and since the origin of this branch was the master, which was the name of the branch, or main, whatever your name is, I would say git push origin head, and head is where I currently am in this branch. So I want to push where I'm at to the origin. The caveat to this is, in doing this, all it's going to do is take my changes and create a merge request and push them, but I haven't actually told my local branch to then follow that new branch I've created online. So I have a local branch. I don't have an online branch. This will create it, but it won't actually follow it. So the secret here is set origin, if I spell it right. And you can do a set origin. You can also just do -u, and it does the same thing. So for people who like to type less, that's kind of a tip. I will go ahead and do that. And what this is going to do is it's going to create the branch on the remote branch, which is the online version, the Git server version. You'll see it's actually talking to the server. And it will create me a merge request automatically as well. And it'll actually give me that URL right here, and we can see what's going on with that URL. Now, the nice thing about this is when I follow this and I set my upstream to follow this merge request, what happens is if Darren goes in or anybody else goes in via the web IDE or the command line and makes changes on that remote branch, if I do a git pull here, I'll get their changes too. So it keeps my local in sync with whatever is current online. So because the release post is collaborative, tech writers are making changes and all sorts of people are making changes to that branch, as long as you remember to pull and your set upstream is done correctly, you will always get the latest version, which means you'll never get merge conflicts in theory, and you'll be able to edit stuff from the command line, from your local editor, from whatever you want to do locally, and push without worry about having merge conflicts or problems, because you as the release post owner own that branch. People shouldn't be merging to it unless you're saying, yeah, go ahead and hit merge. And you can then easily work in both the web ID and locally by just remembering to pull before you start making changes locally. It makes it really, really fast. So as content comes in, you can actually come here and use the grep command to find what release post item it's in. It just makes it really fast. You'll see here.
So Mark, that's a quick question. So quick question. So your rule of thumb then in following this process is that you would actually run the git pull command locally before you make any changes locally.
Right. If that means if like my tech writer has come in and done their work and made some changes, the remote branch is different than my local branch. Now, I can make the changes locally. I'm just going to hit a merge conflict. I'm going to have to resolve that, which from the command line is actually not all that hard, which is kind of nice to know. And I can actually walk through that if you're interested in seeing that. But if you pull first, since you own it and you kind of know what's going on during the release post, you kind of know, oh, wait, somebody's out there making changes actively. I'm not going to pull and make changes right now because you don't want to deal with conflicts. Or you can say, I'm going to just deal with the conflicts. It's fine. I now have this nice little remote merge request. I'll go ahead and go to it. we're going to make this a draft simply because I want to make sure I don't actually merge it because I'm introducing a typo to our main page, which would be bad. So this is a draft. Now I can see the changes right here, and you can actually see what happens. Now, when there's 144 files here, this view is what gets really hard to see. And this is why I was having trouble when I was trying to use the web IDE is there's 144 files here. It's kind of hard to view what's going on. However, I could come in here and I could say, hey, I want to edit this in the web IDE. I want to make some changes. And that's totally fine. If people want to make their changes through the web, that's great. It's collaborative software. We don't force you into one specific way of doing things. I can come in here and add a second period, and I can actually go ahead and commit this. And you'll see I'm doing the same thing as I did on the command line. I'm committing this, and here's my chance to enter my message, same as I did there. And I'm going to put it on the release test branch. So I hit commit. Changes are made. They're made remotely. That's great. It works fine. What this means, though, is once this commit happens, my local branch is different than the branch, remote branch. So I'll let this commit finish, and then we can show how that's easy to rectify here. This was the other thing I found is the commit online actually was slightly slower from my perception than it was doing it here, because I could do numerous local commits. So I'd make some changes, do a commit, make some more changes, do another commit, make some more changes, do another commit, and then I'd push all 3 commits at once to remote. And it was way quicker than me having to wait for each individual change to sort of take place. So we'll see that this has happened, which is fine. I'll go back to my merge request over here, my demo. We'll see that now I have 2 commits. One was local, one was online. That's fine. And I do a Git Status, and it says I'm still fine. Why is that? Well, because I haven't actually refetched anything. If I do a git fetch, what this does is it fetches the current status of the repository from my remote, from my upstream. And I do a git status now, and it will say your branch is behind the origin release test branch, which is the remote version, by 1 commit. And it's telling you you're able to fast forward. I do a git pull here, like it instructs me. And now what we'll see is that second period I added comes local. So if I do it in, what was the file? And I open up that file again, we see that I have that second period that was added to the web IDE. Again, it allows you to use either, whichever is easier for you. But for things like finding changes, what I found was a really effective workflow is I would proof it here. I'd be reading this, and as I'd see problems, I'd come over to my command line, I'd fix them, I'd commit them, I'd go back, and I kind of did the whole thing that way. And then I went and pushed all my commits at once, and I was done with my proof.
That's brilliant. So if I can summarize and refer back to you, what I think I've heard, this is brilliant, by the way, Mark, is that by using Git locally, it sounds as if it's potentially prevents you from having a whole bunch of merge requests, conflicts, if you follow that process of, hey, every time before you make a change locally, you do a git fetch and you do a git pull to make sure that any changes all of the folks are making you have pulled in. So it reduces the amount of potential work you have to do in terms of managing merge request conflicts. And then the other benefit, as you're pointing out, is that it simplifies you managing all of these different release post entries that are happening because everything is local, you're running locally, and so on.
Right, exactly. When we're working through the web interface, what we end up seeing is everything is a separate file, and that's how the release post is structured. And it's very easy from a command line to make a lot of small files feel like one large file by doing command line searching and things like that. Or even if you don't want to do command line searching, you can open up VS Code, make this a project, and then you can search the whole project. So if all the files in this folder are in a project, the VS Code search will search all the files in that project, and you end up with the same benefit. You don't need to know the command line nearly as much. I'm very comfortable with it, so it's just easier for me to bounce back and forth between my editor and my command line, and that's fine. But there are web IDEs, or just not web IDEs, local IDEs or development environments like VS Code that allow you to do the search on the whole project. And again, you're just getting that capability of seeing all the files, searching all the files, making your changes as you go without having to kind of do that bouncing back and forth on a web page. And to me, that was a much faster route. It might not be for everyone.
Right, so to recap then, one option for release post managers is that I think the first step in the process is creating the release post branch, creating a release post branch, managing it locally, and then realizing that once you have that local branch created, before you make a change on any file locally as part of the release post branch, go ahead and do a git fetch to
Yeah.
make sure that you're in sync with what's happening upstream, because obviously tons of changes are happening upstream. Do a git pull, and then that will just reduce the amount of work that you have to do in terms of managing merge conflicts and hopefully being able to find the file or files that you need to find in order to make changes.
Yeah. And we added a couple other tips that were kind of nice here too. One of them is the steps you're supposed to do a day or so before the official merge takes place. The tech consultant, we had one engineering sort of tech consultant for the release post, Thomas Wood. I mean, he actually went off and said, hey, there's a pretty easy way to do this check where you're actually merging your changes in ahead of time. You're merging master back into your remote branch, and you're going to catch all the merge conflicts a day before you actually go live. So you're not doing it live. And he was nice enough to kind of talk about what he did here, which is the same thing. He checked it out. And then he went ahead and did a merge master on it. And what that does is it's merging master in with your branch, still on your branch. And if you have conflicts with master at that point, or main, or whatever your main branch is, you'll catch them now, as opposed to when you, hey, let's add it to the merge train, and you end up with a flood of errors. You'd rather know that ahead of time so you're not on the clock. So this is the command line version of doing that, which worked out really well. And I actually found we're supposed to count features. And this was a real challenge to do through the web interface, because you're trying to count file names, but you need to know, is the file a primary or secondary feature? And you're not really looking at the file, you're looking at the name. And sometimes you can't really tell because not everybody is perfect with their file naming. There's a little one-liner here that I found that does it for you from the command line, which is really nice as well. So if you do the same thing where you're searching files, and you can actually look for secondary or primary or secondary in the files. So now you're looking in the files, and then you're counting how many of those you get. And I see there's 43 features, which is a lot quicker than trying to go through the files and make sure you're counting the ones that are primary features and secondary features, because some will get numbers put in front of them by our social marketing people in order to put them in the right order. Some won't say secondary or primary in the title. So you're like, is that a deprecation or not? This was really simple, and it's actually using the contents of the file instead of the file name. So there's little things like that. And I'm sure people smarter than I will come up with other ways of streamlining this as well if we so desire. So that's sort of my overview for how I did things. And I'll go ahead and cancel that merge request, obviously, so we don't actually make changes. But you'll have your own branch by default. When you run the tools, it creates the branch for you. And from then on, it's just a matter of just keeping it up to date, and you can work wherever you want.
Oh, this is super helpful, Mark. So I think sort of to wrap up, folks, so folks are looking at the video, we will post the video in Unfiltered and link to it in the the Fortinet release post channel. And I think, Mark, as you were pointing out earlier, you and I just have to work together to figure out how to take all of this great content that you just showed, plus the stuff in the retrospective, and figure out where it might be inserted in the release post process page.
Right. And our intent is not to mandate command line for people. It's simply to provide that alternative opportunity that may or may not be beneficial. So
absolutely. Well, this is super brilliant, Mark. Thank you for sharing this. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, everyone, well, that's it. Thanks again to Mark for doing this. This was super helpful. And I could see why Mark's use of the command line certainly helps for a lot of things that you could run into, especially managing these many changes. So this is really helpful for me. So thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.